I feel like pretty much everyone out there has tried online dating at some point. I remember my first and only time using a dating app. It almost ended in a legitimate nightmare. Back then, literally everyone I knew was on Tinder. My friends were using it for all kinds of reasons, and most of them were having pretty good luck. When I finally caved and downloaded the app, I'll admit I was at an all-time low mentally. I was lonely, isolated, and just looking for a connection. The first couple of days were pretty quiet. I got a few matches, but the conversations went nowhere. Then I matched with Zoe. Before we even exchanged a single message, I was already hooked just based on her pictures. We started chatting on the app, which quickly turned into texting all day long. There was an instant connection between us, or at least that's what I convinced myself. In reality, I was probably just starved for attention. After a bit of small talk, I took a shot and asked her out for drinks. Without a second of hesitation, she said yes. That first date was easily the best experience I ever had with Zoe. Right after I dropped her at her place, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her saying how much fun she'd had and how she couldn't wait to see me again. I felt the exact same way. Over the next week or so, things moved fast. We went on more dates, and she started hanging out at my apartment constantly. Looking back, things were moving way too fast, but I didn't care at the time. I wasn't looking for my soulmate, I was just looking to have fun, and I thought we were both on the same page. Turns out, there was a massive miscommunication. The very first time I told her I couldn't hang out because I already had plans with my friends, she completely lost her mind. And I'm not just exaggerating. She literally drove straight over to my apartment as I was getting ready to leave and forcibly blocked my doorway. I ended up blowing off my friends that night because I spent hours just trying to calm her down. She stayed over, and a few hours later, she was acting super sweet and cute again, like she was a completely different person from the one screaming at me earlier. That night, she started talking about how cute our babies would be and how she couldn't wait to start a family with me. Obviously, now I realize that's a glaring red flag, but at the time, I was an ignorant, lonely guy who ignored every warning sign. After that crazy night, I deliberately started waiting longer to reply to her texts. But whenever I took too long, she'd send dozens of frantic messages before I could even respond once. It was getting completely out of hand. A few nights later, I had to cancel plans with her because I got stuck late at work. Just like before, she flipped out. Because I was at my job, I couldn't really text her the way I wanted to, so my responses were a bit vague. Roughly 2 hours after I cancelled, she showed up outside my workplace. Thankfully, I work at a research lab, so the front doors stay locked 24/7, but that didn't stop her. She was literally pounding on the glass, trying to force her way inside. Before my co-workers could call the cops, I went down to address it. As soon as I stepped outside, she started hitting me in the chest, yelling at the top of her lungs. For some reason, I started apologizing. Then she broke down crying, begging me for one more chance. I gave in, but I told her we had to slow things down. She promised she wouldn't text me for the rest of the night until I messaged her first. When I got back inside and checked my phone a few minutes later, I had 33 missed text messages from her. I just shook my head and tried to figure out how the hell I was going to get out of this situation. I got off work late that night and went straight home. When I walked into my bedroom, I immediately noticed that 2 of my dresser drawers were cracked slightly open. Now, that might not sound weird to most people, but I am freakishly OCD about keeping drawers and cabinets shut. I double-check every single drawer in my apartment before I leave for work. Even though my front door was locked when I got home, it felt like someone had been inside my apartment. My mind went straight to Zoe. I texted her and asked her what she had been up to all night. She sent me a picture of her playing cards with her parents earlier that evening. I tried to believe her, but my gut was telling me something was wrong. All night, I felt sick to my stomach. I kept hearing faint noises around the apartment that made me think someone was in there with me. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination. I got up and shut the bedroom door. Even with the door closed, my cat, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, kept staring at the door, completely motionless, like he heard it too. It was a miserable, terrifying night. The next morning, I woke up feeling physically sick from the stress. I called off work, decided to stay home, and spent the day watching movies on the couch. Zoe and I texted throughout the day. Surprisingly, she was really calm about me staying home. I thought to myself, maybe our last conversation actually worked. It was honestly the best day we'd had since our first date. At around 8 p.m., sitting on the couch, I started feeling cold, so I walked into the bedroom to grab a sweatshirt. I flipped on the light. Just reliving this moment gives me chills. On the far side of my room, there was a full-length floor mirror. When the light clicked on, I caught a reflection at the bottom of the mirror. Underneath my bed, there was a person hiding under my frame. I could see bright blonde hair. Her face was turned away, but I could clearly see part of her head in the reflection. It was Zoe. She was just lying there, completely still. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Instead of screaming or letting her know I saw her, I forced myself to stay calm. I grabbed a sweatshirt hanging off the back of the door, turned off the light, and walked back out to the living room. I turned up the volume on the TV so it sounded like I was still watching the movie. Then, as quietly as possible, I slipped out of the apartment and shut the door behind me. I kept texting her back from my phone so she wouldn't suspect a thing. Instead of running out of the building, I went into the laundry room and called the police. I told the dispatcher that a woman I had been seeing was currently hiding under my bed. Within minutes, the police arrived and cleared the apartment. They found Zoe still lying flat under the bed. The most terrifying part? She was carrying a massive hunting knife, not a pocket knife, a huge blade. When the officers asked if she intended to use it on me, her response was, "I don't think so, maybe." I showed the police all my text messages to prove everything I was saying. In a weird way, I felt bad for her. It was clear something wasn't working right in her head. She ended up getting the psychological help she needed, or at least that's what I was told. I never saw her again. Every once in a while, I'll get a text from a random burner number that just says, "Hi." I don't have proof, but deep down, I know it's Zoe. I know online dating works for a lot of people, but that single experience was enough to make me retire from dating apps for good. The next story. I don't know if anyone remembers the absolute joy of dating back in 2020, but it definitely wasn't the easiest thing in the world to do. I am a pretty social guy. I love going out, meeting people, and just having face-to-face conversations. So when that was suddenly off the table during the lockdowns, I felt like a wild animal trapped in a cage. As things slowly started opening back up, a friend of mine told me I should give online dating a shot. I wasn't totally sold, but I downloaded an app called Bumble. Right off the bat, I matched with a lovely young woman named Kelsey. At first glance, her profile looked totally legit. We started messaging back and forth, doing all the usual early-stage small talk. Then, on our very first night texting, Kelsey asked me a question out of nowhere. She asked if I'd ever be open to meeting her at a more unconventional time. I had a feeling I knew what she was getting at, but I wanted her to say it first. Finally, she did. She asked if I would be okay meeting her at after midnight. Now, I'm no online dating expert, but if someone asks to meet you past midnight, you naturally assume it's an implied hookup. I started acting playful and flirtatious, grilling her about why she wanted to meet so late. After a few spicy messages, she came clean. She told me she was camping with her family at a local lake in my hometown. She claimed she had to wait for her family to fall asleep so she could sneak out. That's when my very first alarm bell went off. Why would a 26-year-old woman need to sneak away from her family? She's an adult. On top of that, the idea of meeting a total stranger at a pitch-black lake at midnight made me a little uneasy. I went back and checked her pictures again. She looked completely real. Nothing about her photos felt staged or fake. I even decided to sleuth her social media, and sure enough, she had an active Facebook and Instagram. She was definitely a real person. Once I convinced myself she wasn't a catfish, I agreed to meet her at the lake at 12:30 a.m. The lake and campgrounds were about a 40-minute drive from my house. While I was on my way, Kelsey sent me a text telling me to park on the far side of the lake. To give you some context, if you go to the campgrounds, you take a path to the right of the entrance, but if you take the left path, it leads to the public park side, which closes strictly at dark. I asked her why she wanted me over there, and she said it was for privacy. The campgrounds were packed with people, but the closed park side would guarantee we were completely alone. Those were her exact words. I completely bought into it. When I pulled up around 12:30 a.m., I ignored the no trespassing after dark signs. Unsurprisingly, I was the only car in the massive pitch-black lot. I drove all the way to the back and parked under a large tree for extra cover. I texted Kelsey to let her know I was getting out of my car and walking toward the water. Butterflies were flipping in my stomach. A second later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kelsey. "I see you." I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. I began loudly whispering her name into the dark. No response. I texted her back, "Where are you? I don't see you." She immediately replied, "I'm right over here. How can you not see me?" Now I was getting confused and a little frustrated. I couldn't tell if she was playing a mind game or if I was just missing something. After a couple of minutes of going back and forth, I told her she needed to step out onto the main path where I was standing. I looked at my phone screen, and the 3 typing dots just sat there for a long time. Finally, a message popped up. "Look to your right." I turned my head to the right. A massive figure stepped out from behind a tree, waved at me, and just as quickly ducked back behind it. I froze. Everything in my gut screamed that something was horribly wrong. The figure that just stepped out was extremely tall and ridiculously skinny. It was the exact opposite of Kelsey. In all her pictures, Kelsey was short and curvy. Before I could process what I was looking at, another text came in from Kelsey's phone. "I'm so cold. I need you to warm me up."
Instead of texting back, I dialed her number. Immediately, a loud phone vibration rang out from the darkness on my other side, not from where the tall figure had just waved.
I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear heavy breathing in the pitch-black woods nearby. Then came one last text from her account. "Please come over here. I'm getting sad that you don't want to see me." Every single survival instinct in my brain went off at once. Without thinking, I turned on my heel and sprinted full speed back toward my car. The moment I bolted, the tall, skinny guy behind the tree and a second person hiding in the bushes burst out of the darkness and chased right after me. I had just enough of a head start to reach my car, jump inside, and slam the lock button. As I shoved my key into the ignition, I looked up through the windshield. The sight of those two running at my vehicle will haunt my dreams forever. The tall, skinny guy reached the front of my car first. He was an older man with a patchy beard and sunken, decaying skin. He was pounding on my hood with a heavy steel hammer. The second guy ran up to my driver's side door. He was a massive man, easily twice my size. He was completely bald, with a long beard down to his chest and a rose tattoo inked onto the side of his head. He started yanking violently on my door handle. When it wouldn't open, he reared back and threw his bare fist through my driver's side window, shattering the glass. The second that glass cracked, I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal and floored it. The skinny man barely jumped out of the way as I peeled out of the lot. As I was speeding down the road, my phone buzzed one last time. It was the final text I ever received from the fake Kelsey profile. It simply said, "I know where you live." I was way too terrified to go home, so I pulled over in a safe area once I stopped shaking and called the police. When officers investigated, they confirmed that the real Kelsey was indeed an innocent person. Those two monsters had found her public profile on Facebook, scraped her photos, and built a fake persona to lure victims out to the lake. The police contacted the real Kelsey, who was horrified and immediately made all her accounts private. The burner phone number they used was disconnected minutes later, and the Bumble account was deleted. It's been about 6 years since that night, and to my knowledge, those men were never caught. I didn't fully realize it until that night, but monsters really are everywhere. You have to be extremely careful because you truly never know who is waiting for you on the other side of a screen.
The next story.
4 years ago, I moved to a new town for work. When I first got there, I was struggling, not financially, but socially. My whole life, I have had a hard time meeting people and making friends. The nights got long and lonely fast. Sitting alone in my apartment with nothing to do was eating away at me. A buddy from back home told me to download a few dating apps. I wasn't big on the idea. Building a relationship through text messaging always felt impossible to me, but I gave in. For weeks, nothing happened. I was just about to delete the apps when I got a notification from Tinder. I matched with a girl named Beth. She had a distinct goth style, which caught my attention right away, since I definitely have a type. Talking to her felt effortless. She carried conversations in a way that kept me hooked. One thing I loved right off the bat was that she didn't have social media. She called it the devil, and honestly, I couldn't agree more. We set up a date at a local restaurant, and when she walked in, she looked exactly like her pictures. The date went great, and after a few more meetups, things started heading towards a real relationship. Beth was definitely weird, but I didn't mean that as an insult. I like weird.
She had a dark sense of humor that I found charming. Once I was completely head over heels for her, she suggested a different kind of date. She asked if she could take me on a romantic, moonlit hike through the woods to show me a secret spot deep in the forest that hardly anyone knew about. Now, I hate the outdoors, but at that point, I would have done pretty much anything for Beth, so I agreed. I expected us to go around dusk, but she insisted we go much later. That night, she hung out at my place until 1 a.m., then stood up and said it was time to leave. I was driving, and she was giving directions. I was new to the area, so I had no clue where we were going. We drove for nearly an hour into total darkness until we were way out in the middle of nowhere. She told me to pull over on the shoulder. There was zero cell service. When I stepped out of the car, I looked around for a trailhead, but there wasn't one. Beth smiled and said we were taking a special path to a magical place.
We started walking blindly into the woods. I had heavy boots, jeans, and a zip-up hoodie on, and I was still struggling to navigate the brush. Beth, on the other hand, was wearing a flowing white dress and wooden sandals. It was the first time I'd ever seen her wear anything other than black, and she was gliding through the terrain effortlessly. She kept talking about the stranger things as we walked. I was barely listening because I was focused on not tripping in the pitch-black woods. The bright moon overhead was our only light source. I kept asking how much farther it was, like a kid on a road trip. She ignored my questions and just laughed every time. Suddenly, she let out a loud squeal of excitement that made me jump out of my skin. She turned around with pure joy in her eyes and told me to look at what she found. I looked up, expecting to see a flower or a cool rock. Instead, Beth was holding a massive live snake that was actively slithering up her arm. I panicked, lost my footing, and fell flat on my back. The snake was inches from my face. Beth was laughing hysterically, bringing it closer and asking if I thought it was cute. I yelled at her to get it away from me. She finally let it slither off into the brush, leaned down and whispered, "Don't worry, we're almost there." A couple of minutes later, we broke through the tree line into a large open clearing drenched in moonlight. Beth kicked off her sandals and started dancing in circles in the middle of the field. I stood there watching her, wondering how long we were going to stay out here before we could go home. Abruptly, she stopped dancing. She froze and stared blankly into the pitch-black tree line. Without turning around, she asked me in a flat voice, "Are you ready?" Before I could even ask what she meant, 3 women burst out of the woods. They weren't dancing. They marched into the clearing with aggressive purpose. The shock caused me to stumble backward onto the ground. Before I could scramble back up to my feet, all 3 women tackled me and pinned me down to the dirt. Beth skipped over to a large boulder and pulled out a heavy beige cloth bag. As she picked it up, I could hear metal tools clinking against each other inside. I was squirming and screaming at the top of my lungs, but these women had a vice grip on my limbs. 2 of them looked to be in their 20s, while the third was easily in her 50s. Beth started walking toward me with the bag in her hands. Then the 3 women holding me down began chanting in unison. It wasn't English. It sounded like Latin or some ancient dialect. Pure adrenaline kicked in. I thrusted my body back and forth with everything I had. My zip-up hoodie was already partially unzipped, and as I yanked myself forward, the zipper completely snapped. I slid my arms right out of the sleeves, leaving the women holding an empty sweatshirt. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted blindly into the dark woods. Behind me, I could hear them screaming, but they weren't angry screams. They sounded like wailing, mournful cries. I didn't care. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, completely lost in the dark. Eventually, I burst out onto a paved road. I ran down the asphalt until I spotted a 24-hour gas station. The attendant called the police for me. When officers arrived, the deputy clearly didn't believe my story, asking if I was under the influence of drugs. He drove me around until we found my parked car miles away, which had already been called in as an abandoned vehicle. When the police tried to look up Beth, she vanished into thin air. Her phone number was from a temporary burner app, her dating profile was deleted, and she had no social media footprint. I realized I didn't even know her last name, where she lived, or what kind of car she drove. To this day, I have nightmares about what was inside that cloth bag. I know this story sounds completely outrageous, but it really happened, and I have to live with that memory for the rest of my life.